So I didn't intend this at all, but last week's movie and this week's movie are kind of the same story, but from different perspectives, aren't they? Last week we saw the village that's being possibly destroyed by development, and this week we saw the developers with one person from that village there. So I thought it made for an amazing contrast. I wish I could say that I planned that, but it made for a wonderful continuation of last week's discussion, but from a whole different perspective. So in Beatriz at dinner, where did you see God? How was God present?
Goodness.
What?
You can look across the room and see the video.
Yeah. Can you see us?
So try to look up.
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Well, we've got her computer.
Yeah.
We've got my video with no sound.
Okay.
And John with no video, but voice.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of both of us.
Between the two of you, you can figure out some things. But isn't that the way it usually goes?
Usually.
That's not necessarily a bad thing to be in one of those symbiotic relationships, shall we say, where both of us do some of the work and together we get it all done.
What do you do?
Yeah.
God would approve.
All right, so what did you think about Beatriz? Because in most of the movie, at least she was trying. It was trying to kind of show her as the different voice in the life of the developers, a voice that I think most developers need to hear, right? And so in a very real way, she was absolutely set up as the voice of God in this story, right?
Yeah, you know, I'd like to go back to your prior question, which is, where did we see God?
Yeah.
Because Sharon and I chatted a little bit after watching it last night, and we both said the movie was a work of art. And what art does is, I think, related to God, that it tells the truth, and it portrays, depicts important things about us in life with great fidelity and in a way that is very impactful and important.
The hard part is, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and Sharon made the comment, I don't want to speak for her, but she made it to me last night, and it really hit me that, for example, the developer character that John Lithgow played was portrayed in full dimension. It wasn't a cartoon character of an evil person, even though a lot of what he did was evil, but it portrayed him with great depth and great fidelity to what a human being might be like.
That's right. Absolutely.
And so the whole movie, I thought it was a masterpiece. And I didn't have that impression the first time I watched it, and I did last night after a second watching.
That's why it's often important to watch it, because the first time we just see the story, the relative surface line of it. And I think that if it's truly art, then we need to go back and let it penetrate us in a different way.
I was telling Greg that I think we saw it the first time in a movie theater. And sometimes when I see a movie that is very moving, but I'm in a public place, you know, I kind of hold myself back. And here we were in our home watching this. And I mean, I was at the end of it just sobbing. I just thought it was just so moving, so beautiful, so
sad.
Yes, sad.
Are you saying you don't have to hold back in front of Greg?
That's right. You've seen me cry a few times.
Mostly because it's something I've said.
You know, the thing I liked about this is at first, it's easy just to look at it from the perspective of Beatriz. And she is right to critique the developers. right? And the struggle that they put into her community back home, right? Into her soul at this point, how they were definitely coming from a very different perspective than what she was. But the ending absolutely makes us have to question her as well, right? Because that's what she does, is she says, in essence, what is the right course of action and who has to be stopped in some ways, right? And it's much easier if just John Lithgow, who is awful, his name in the movie, his name is Doug Strutt.
Right.
And he is evil embodied, but you're right, not just that, to where she has to consider something more as well.
Well, he made comments about insights about, he said you get to know people that you work with. You see their ego, you see their, he made some comments to me that just made me realize this is a person, who thinks about life and made these choices that he made that were horrible. I mean, I thought the characters were drawn so realistically. I mean, I have known people, like we all probably in our lives, men with power. I just thought he was amazingly drawn as a character.
And all the other characters.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah. So Joni and I have some really good friends of ours who live in the rich section of Phoenix area, right? Joni and Julie were high school. I think they met in 6th grade, right? They were on the same pom team in high school, and just amazing friends of ours. Julie is the daughter of the person. Have you ever gone to the dentist and had the nasal hood? He invented that.
Oh my.
Right? And so she's the inheritor of all of that. And so, shall we say, I feel a little bit like Beatriz walking behind the rich people, right? Going past the pool that way. And yet they are just dear friends, and we sit and we have the best conversations, even though some of the choices they have in their life, and I'm not saying they're bad choices, it's just they're choices that I wouldn't make. And yet they are also deeply spiritual people, Sunday school teachers at their church, very much leaders in the communities of which they're a part. And so anytime I want to judge a Doug Strutt, I go back to how much is that reflected in Julie and Gary, my friends. And everyone is absolutely more than just the evil that we like to place on them, right? Mm-hmm. It's simpler to do that. It's just not the full story of anybody. Mm-hmm. Catherine, welcome. Good to have you here. Sorry, we're having this conversation and I saw you kind of come in and didn't acknowledge you. Good to have you. The hard part is that to understand somebody like Strutt, you have to hear more than whatever the destruction is. She saw reflected in him whoever the other developer was that made it so that her family had to flee from their hometown. Right? And it's hard not to see that other person when you see this new person that seems to reflect that. Somebody built that other hotel, and it was devastating. Somebody was building the development in Milagro. It doesn't mean that this next person is that person.
Well, and part of the storyline was the lobbyist character who talked about his 1 to 2 year process of getting approval by the state legislators, which means, they're part of this whole, they bear responsibility for this whole development. And that wasn't touched on in great detail, but it was made plain it was part of the story.
Mm-hmm. And no no action is a completely solitary action. And so no matter how much one person might be to blame, taking that person out doesn't take out the issue either. Right? And each person does that for a lot of different reasons. Right? Their own economic security is built into that, and maybe they have an inflated sense of what that economic security is, but it doesn't mean that it's just a bad thing that's going on, right? The young couple was trying to find their footing, and they were measuring it by these people who had these. I mean, wasn't that a magnificent house? Mm-hmm. And it's you know, that's part of what their dream was to have that type of house. So part of the question is always not is their action good or bad, but what are they basing that action on? And is that the best thing to base it on?
I thought the character of Kathy, the wife, you know, who employed Beatriz,
yeah,
was kind of the definition of this movie, just that tension. I felt like Beatriz was someone who had not sold out. Kathy was kind of having one foot in one place and one foot in the other, trying to straddle this tension. And then obviously Doug's strut was sold out. I mean, that's kind of how I first saw it. It was very nuanced, like we've been talking about. So they were, but to me, it was like Kathy was trying, you know, and I was saying to Greg, it's like, I think that often suffering is a portal to people becoming sensitive, you know, opening themselves. And through her daughter's cancer, she got to know Beatrice and kind of this way of healing and all of this. And so she was open to that and cared about Beatrice, but she still had a foot in this life and was trying to impress, you know, her husband's boss. And I just thought that tension was so well portrayed in this story.
That's why going back to the one scene that is very striking to me always, the three ladies talking and walking past the pool, and then all of a sudden Kathy noticing, oh, Beatriz is over here. I value Beatriz. I want her to be part of this conversation, but we get caught up in the other conversation, and this is all well and good, but then she saw, but wait, it doesn't include all of what I want to value. And she valued, like you said, Beatriz, because they met in a different space, and she saw the value outside of the definition of much of her life. Much of her life was defined by the size of the house, the amount of the paycheck, all of those kinds of things. But Beatriz was not. And she had a different value there.
The difference was portrayed several times in different ways. And I'm remembering when they were handing the cell phone around early, the women were, about this celebrity woman, her genitals, and how the women, the affluent women, were speaking partly sympathetically, and yet their behavior was at the same time dehumanizing, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, the very gossipy stereotype.
Right, and Beatrice's reaction when she held the phone and then looked at the other women was quite telling. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the hard part is that we all sit in that space where suddenly someone is the very different reaction to. And do we just cut them off and say, you're not with the program? Or is that a space where we open our heart to insight? And insight is always a bit challenging to us because it's much simpler when everyone agrees with us. Catherine.
Well, I'm struck by so many things. It was a fascinating film for many, many different reasons, but I'm struck by the fact that so often when we're in a group, it is easier to go along, and it's hard to be the one that says, no, this isn't right, because we know that happens again and again. How many times have we all participated and gone along with the crowd? I think it's particularly a problem for young people who are trying to sort things out, and yet there's their peer group and that comfort in belonging, and and being torn by what we might know to be right in our heart, and yet wanting to fit in and be part of the group.
Right. But part of that can be alleviated by someone else in the group choosing purposely to make a space for the outsider. When Kathy looked back at the pool, she was essentially saying, this is a person of value, let me tell you why. And drew a space for her, even though she didn't belong, right? Didn't talk in the same way, didn't act in the same way, whatever the definitions were. And that's beholden to all of us, no matter how much we fit into a community, to decide how do I make it easy for someone who doesn't fit to still be able to be present.
One thing that struck me during the film was that juxtaposition of this very different person was a possibility of everyone there entering into a deeper awareness and participation in what it means to be a person.
Yes.
Because money and fame and all those things really do not reach deep into what it is to be a person. I mean, there's some nice things that come from those things, but the deepest joy and the deepest experience of being human is not at that level.
Right. No matter how much Doug Strutt is able to write a book about that and define it and maybe make a bunch more money on that, that is not what defines the most important part of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, his little short, which Sharon alluded to, at least to me last night, about grabbing the brass ring, and it was really kind of talking about self-actualization and how important that is, which was one of those moments that showed this is a real human being, and that that was kind of telling about a deeper level, but still at the same time for him, it was at ignoring the cost of damage to other people.
Well, and he was interesting. Go ahead.
Well, toward the end of the movie, he's standing alone with Beatriz outside, and he acknowledges the world is dying. He said, but basically, let's eat, drink, and be merry. Let's just have a good time. But it was an insight that the writer of the script said that people like him know what they're doing. They really do know what they're doing, which is both kind of comforting and chilling at the same time.
Yeah, they're not doing it completely unaware. They're just using a different set of values or focus to be able to make those decisions. Mm-hmm. So one of the places where I was very aware of that was in the first exchanges between the two of them, where Beatriz walks up. It wasn't right at the beginning, but after she was with the women, she walks up to the men, and Strutt asks her to get him a drink.
Yes.
And then says, oh, I'm sorry, you were hovering. I thought you were staff. Because that is one of the realities from which he lives, is that he has staff around him who does these tasks for him. And so this person who was not the assertive, I'm going to, get my word into the conversation, it meant that he defined her by his experience. And I think he tried to correct himself very often that way. He wasn't trying to just do that, but that's the thing we have to all be very aware of. Am I defining somebody in a way that's not really true about them? It's more true about me and where I'm at than what it is about them. And that's what was fascinating about these two, is that both of them were kind of looking at each other the whole time trying to say, do I know you?
Yeah.
All right, and they were trying to recognize, who is this stranger? Catherine.
Well, again, it's so easy to put people in a box, in a label, and pigeonhole them and not see anyone as they really are. And I seem to, I get reminded of that, not all the time, but at least there are times when I get that prickle and that, wait a minute, see beyond the outward appearance, because so often many people are hidden. Now Beatriz was pretty upfront. I really liked her moxie. I liked her attitude. She just went for it. But many people keep their thoughts and they're private. They keep their mouth shut in certain circumstances. And unless you take the time to listen and engage them, you'll never know the real thought that's going on, what's really there with someone else.
And to the extent that, like most people may think this person's an asshole, but won't say it. But if they do think that, they sure won't give the shoulder massage. And Beatriz would do both.
Yeah.
Right? Because both of those things were the inherentness of who she is. So she was more in touch with that than with, the hiding that we often do.
That shoulder massage was really something, because at first she seemed to be connecting with him as a person and trying to be supportive in a certain way. But then there was kind of the woo-woo moment where it seemed like they were suggesting she was discerning a great evil within him, and she stepped away kind of in shock.
So the red in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he represented too much of the past, right? And especially with that morning, the goat being killed, right? I guess it wasn't just that morning, but with that so recent upon her, and whoever that evil person was, she's pulling that into this next evil person. And we all do a lot of projecting. If someone gets in my way on the way to work, it sure is easy to yell at somebody at work, right? And it may not have nothing at all to do with the person that I'm yelling at.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this movie was a piece of art because it just showed so much complexity, so much depth. And when we were up in Pine for the hiking last week, every other house has a Trump Pence sign on it. And I found myself up there. I told Greg, I said, do you feel unsafe when you see these? And I realized that's what happens to me when I see people who are supporters of this administration. I feel unsafe. And then we were talking, and it's like my dear aunt and uncle, who are the kindest people and would do anything for anybody, are Trump supporters. And so it's kind of it's so difficult to remember that people are nuanced. And I think that's why I so appreciated this movie, that it was, not that I'm saying, this guy was portrayed as pretty evil, and I believe he was, but still, I don't know, it just left me thinking a lot, this movie.
Absolutely, and it should. Along those lines, you go a little bit further up the mountain and you hit my side of the mountain, and all of my family up there, and they're all Trump supporters, and much of my immediate family wouldn't be the ones that would have the Trump bumper stickers as much, but they're voting for him.
Yeah.
And it's easy to project evil onto all of them.
Yeah.
And not just the evil, but that's an ignorant way to vote. Oh, nobody with intelligence, or nobody that's really looking at the issues, or nobody. It's really easy to project all of that onto. And yet I know about my particular family is that they're thoughtful people, right? They don't just do stupid things. I'm not saying they don't do stupid things. I lived with them for, but we have to remember that, don't we?
Well, again, I think Kathy was the best character that portrayed that kind of tension in a person of positive and negative. And one thing that was difficult for me was that in the beginning, I thought Beatrice was this quiet observer, and it was really profound to see her different reaction to things. And she was kind of this voice of someone who had not sold out, like I said. And then, but she was so sad. She was so sad. And of course, the ending, her choice, you know, it's like my fairy tale story would be that this person would prevail and the others would come to realization that, you know, she had greater wisdom, and it would have ended like that, you know, but it didn't. It was just the saddest movie.
Well, that ending is always fascinating to me, because I think all of us have had dreams of, what if I just do him in?
Yeah.
I just get rid of, that will make everything better. It'll take care of all this stuff. But in some ways, it's that question of, but that would be at the expense of my own soul. And am I going to let him turn me into that?
Hello.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
We've been completely cut off. I mean, we can hear you, but the image is delayed. It just stays still, and we don't have any way to break in.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I really think is important is that we look at Beatrice as a spiritual force, and she was trying to, didn't try to. She was a natural healer, and she was a protector of the earth, and that, I think, was the final discouragement for her, that she could not protect the rhinoceros from being shot, that she could not protect the development from going ahead. And the walk into the ocean was a decision to take herself out of the place where she could no longer do any healing.
Interesting. I like that.
Well, and along with that, too, we were struck, this is the second time we've seen the movie as well, and are very glad that we did. There was a remarkable level that was achieved thanks to the excellent acting, the directing, and the script, where each of them, Beatrice and John Lithgow, when they recognized in each other complete authenticity. He was who he was, and that was clear. Good, bad, evil, fine, whatever. He was completely authentic. She recognized that, and she too was authentic. So when she massages his neck, she is authentically trying to work her well, not miracles quite, but sort of that, her healing. And it also foreshadows that she could strangle him, which of course comes in the form of a knife a little bit later in her mind.
Right.
But with him present, and he recognized that she had come to kill him. The two completely authentic. I didn't hate him quite because he was so authentic. He said, "I'm a fatalist." And the final image of him watching the lanterns float up into the sky, that was something profound to him. We don't quite know what it was,
right? But
it was something of the spirit, and he was not laughing. He was not charmed. And that was simultaneous with the time she was walking into the water. So these are irreconcilable authenticities, which is just brilliant to do as a work of art, as Sharon says.
But all of that was preceded too, John, by the last exchange between Kathy and Beatriz. And Kathy and Beatriz, who probably knew each other the best of everyone there, these were their words. Kathy says, "I kind of feel like I don't know you." And Beatriz says, "You don't know me."
You don't know me, yes.
And isn't that true? Even more so, like between Beatriz and Strutt. They don't know each other, and yet the movie often centered around the ways that they thought they did, or were reacting as if they did, right? And in ways that were very profound, I think, for both of them.
Maybe in a literal sense, Doug was seeing the light, and that's what I'm thinking when it was a beautiful scene, and I think the photography was excellent, but the way things were drawn, and it was fascinating just from a technical standpoint. But we don't know because he doesn't say anything more. But maybe that image was significant in that. Maybe something did happen within him.
Yeah.
It was interesting, the lantern scene, because again, it was intention, because as they were lighting them, they were talking about, oh, you know, what if we burn down the canyon? And they're like, oh, well, you know, we're just going to do this anyway. So it was like this beautiful, poignant scene, but in the background again was their disregard for others, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And every development that somebody like a Doug Strutt puts up is gorgeous, right? You can't walk into any of those large resorts without just being awed by what is there. So there's no doubt some profound beauty that's put there, but we don't know how much there was burning of the canyon in order to get that beauty. Ever. We never know that. All of our cities are that same way. Whatever they are of good for us and to us came at some price to somebody.
Yeah. This notion of knowing one another or who knew one another is important. At the same time, and I don't know if I'm projecting this, but I think of that Old Testament text, I am putting before you life and death. Choose life that you may live. And it was, I don't know, I just think that some people choose death and some people choose life. And ultimately, you know, the Strutt character even said, you know, when he said, I know the earth is dying, let's just eat, drink, and be merry. He had chosen death, you know. And the person that, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally, obviously he represents is our current president, who just seems to have chosen death again and again and again in his life. And the Beatriz character was someone who had chosen life. Ultimately, she didn't, you know.
But let me put a little bit of a different nuance on that, because I think you're absolutely right in that analysis. But how much of it is Strutt choosing life for this short of amount of time, even though death is going to come? And he's saying, I'm going to live fully this life right now. It's just a different definition of the life that Beatriz was seeing. For her, in order to have this kind of life, she had to walk into the ocean. And so her physical life was very short, but it was giving a fullness and a largeness of life, because in some ways she was continuing to live because she didn't lose herself in killing him.
Yeah, you know, my thought is influenced by Marshall Rosenberg, who the late Marshall Rosenberg, who was the teacher of nonviolent communication, and he says that violence is always, and everything that would be truly violent, whether it's evaluating, judging, insulting, whatever. He says violence alienates life in people, not just the person receiving it, but the person doing it is alienating themselves from life. So I think there is a depth of life that is available that the character Strutt didn't experience and turned away from.
Right.
That he just lived on such a superficial level, you know.
I think Beatrice expressed that when she said, all your pleasures are built on another's pain.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And all of us should be honest about the fact that sometimes that's true about us as well.
Totally.
Many of the things that we as Americans, relatively well-to-do Americans, in the safety and security of what we've built, is often because someone else has to go through more difficulty and pay the price for us to do that.
Yeah.
Right? And do we remember that and integrate that into ourselves?
The whole movement to shut down our borders is so that our comfort continues and other people's discomfort is too bad, you know.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. But is simple life what we really want? Or do we want fullness of life, which sometimes is much more complicated? Catherine, you look like you had something to say.
Well, I'm struck by, again, because there's so much thought about, indigenous people, Black people, Asian people, and other minorities in one form or another, and how, that suffering has gone on and on and on. And I think that in order to understand it more, to give voice to that, to say those very words, because I don't think that it is spoken clearly enough. We hear other rhetoric and other words, but I think those words, that energy, that taking that in for myself, just feeling that and really getting it. I'd like to hear more of that kind of commentary being expressed, because I think that is more telling than many other words that get spoken and said.
Thank you. Let me tell you how I watch movies. I like to watch movies in theaters. When I like them enough, then I put them on the list of what I need to buy. So I have the list of what I'm going to buy. Then I watch, when I buy them, I watch them again purposely so that I can re-see and see if I see something of what drew me to it the first time. So and hopefully go even beyond just whatever drew me in the first time. If it moves me the second time, it usually goes on my list, right? Because I want those movies. The easiest types of movies are the ones who, at the end of the movie, give us a nice, simple, tied together, put the bow on it type of answer. This was not one of those kinds of movies. It makes you at the end kind of continue to think and say, okay, what now?
It's funny how we want certain things in the experience, because initially I was wanting Kathy to lend her some clothing and at the beginning when she was going to stay for dinner, because I thought it was, she made the best of, tucked her shirt into her pants.
Yeah.
And then there was the flashes to the people entering, and of course Kathy herself getting ready and being, pretty dressed up, even though it was supposed to be a casual meal or evening. Everybody dressed the part.
Yeah.
And, that was that contrast again. And I thought for sure in my own mind, I guess the projection for me was that I thought, well, she's going to offer her a dress or something to wear. And it really didn't happen, but she stayed again herself. And
She did offer one, yeah.
But then, it wasn't really acted upon. It was in passing.
I was struck specifically by their shoes, right? The three women were in high heels of some sort or another, and she's in these tennis shoes.
And they're falling down on the gravel and the grass.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, to me, that whole scene of her tucking in her shirt and that whole thing blew me away. I'm like, how do artists come up with it? This person obviously has observed life. I swear I have been with people at parties who behave just like these people. It was so real. And I just think what a power of observation the writer of this screenplay had to catch, that little subtle scene of her being inappropriately dressed and how important that was to the story. I just thought this was a really, really special movie.
John, it looked like you were going to say something.
Who, us?
No, I just thought I saw you looking like you were going to.
You saw us? How did you see us?
It just looked like you were beginning to talk. I mean, I didn't see you, but like when sound comes from your thing, we get a little halo around you, which I'm used to seeing halos around you. But I thought it was because you might have something you wanted to say.
Well, I've had a lot of things I wanted to say, but I'm not going to go back over them now.
Well, break
I
in,
see interest. Huh?
break in
Pardon me?
anytime you want to, so that because if it's delayed, we'll stop for you if you break in. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, about Beatrice going into the water, she had betrayed her own vow of life to be a healer.
Yeah.
She is a healer. She believes in life, and she had betrayed it because she was, in her own mind, she was tempted to kill the opponent, and she cannot any longer live with that.
Right. But she addressed that earlier in the film where she looked at him and said, Doug, you think killing is hard. Try healing.
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Being in that much more difficult space of not hitting the other person, right? As Jesus was said, go the extra mile, turn the other cheek, all of those kind of things. That's hard work to do.
Oh, yeah.
Because the slapping of the other face is a very natural reaction, especially when someone's as wrong as Doug Strutt.
Yeah. Well, wrong in our terms because
Right.
we've made a commitment, in our spiritual way. But he is authentic in what he believes. He believes in fate. He said so. And therefore, that's his behavior. They didn't get into an outright knockdown argument over the dinner table when it was just the two of them. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
That their two moral minds were talking to each other to find out where and who each other was. It was just amazing. It would have been so easy to direct it with them breaking into a fight and she throws something in his face and he shouts at her and so on. No, they didn't do that. We got the most amazing dialogue between what are you if you're a fatalist and what are you if you have a faith and a belief in a spiritual level of living. It's amazing.
I think I want to add there, I think another scene that was very powerful was when she was singing to all of them.
Oh, yes.
And then the camera moved around to the various people who were listening, and they were touched. There was something that she stirred in her song in them. And they did not necessarily know what it was, but they were moved by her songs.
Yeah. And I was struck this time by how she chose to come back to be able to do that, because the protocol had been breached and she had been sent to her room and grounded and everything, and it would have been much simpler to remain distant. And yet she said, I made the commitment to come in and sing, to heal, essentially.
Yes.
I'm going to come and do that. And do we step back in those moments, or do we continue? Do we stay in that either self-imposed or imposed by others exile, which is easier, safer?
It strikes me that Beatrice's character was wavering throughout, and I'm only realizing that now. She, at one point, after I think throwing the phone, she comes back and apologizes and said, I lost my manners, as if she shouldn't have been confronted. And then later she says, oh, I drank too much wine, I never should. But then she takes the bottle up to the room with her.
I was struck by that too, Greg.
Yeah.
Pretty much as she's walking off with the bottle, she's saying that.
Yeah. So then the final struggle, of course, is the grabbing the knife. And the first time I saw the movie, I didn't grasp why they portrayed the murder, and then it didn't happen. And after watching last night, I thought the writer is showing us her inner life, and there's no other way to show it as powerfully as the way he ended up showing it. So she was struggling there about, what do I do in the face of this evil? And ultimately, just exiting from life was her decision. But so anyway, she was struggling throughout.
Yes.
What do I do in the face of this?
Right. Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, once again, I love all the commentary because we all see different things and varying strengths. And I'm thinking, how many people in the moment don't carry it any further, and then they do, out of a sense of righteousness, feel that it's okay to take a life, that they're justified in killing another human being or killing something, an animal or whatever is before them. They don't take it further. They don't have any brakes on. They just proceed from that premise or that place, which is scary in and of itself, not to be able to stop.
One of the very long-term discussions in Christian theology is what's called just war theory. When is it that it is a just thing to have war? When should you fight against? Is me using killing to stop someone who is doing greater killing okay? But I think that's always a struggle, because what am I supposed to do to stop what I think of as evil? But have I become evil in doing that? And I'm not certain that there's a clear and an easy answer to that. But at least this is trying to say that for Beatrice, at least, killing John Lithgow, Doug Strutt, was stopping evil, but it was not worth the evil that it placed in her.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's a tough question, right?
Especially right now. I think this movie was much more painful to watch 3 years later than when it first came out, because of what's going on right now.
Does it reflect our time so amazingly?
And that struggle of how to react to this.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another thing that occurs to me was early on, when we hear her tell that her neighbor murdered her goat. And as she's telling it to Kathy, who says, "Oh, that's awful, that's horrible." And in that moment, it's so clear that what that neighbor did was evil, selfish. And then when Beatrice is in the tow truck driving away, she says about Doug Strutt, "That man killed my goat."
Right.
It's like he was much more complex than her neighbor, but ultimately she said he's the same guy.
She said all tears come from the same source. That was
All tears, wasn't that a great line? All tears come from the same source.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it meant.
But maybe that's one of those kinds of lines that we shouldn't know, or shouldn't give too simplistic and easy an answer to. Maybe we should let it sit inside of us and continue to inform us for a while. Draw us into a deeper answer than whatever the first one is. Joni was struck by one other thing. She said, Salma Hayek is one of the most beautiful women, and how did they make her so plain? Right? because she could have been walking along with them in the high heels and the style, because she has been that person, right? She absolutely has that as part of her own self. And yet here they take her and make her into the most overlooked, we could easily overlook her, but not the truth of her, just that physical appearance of her in this movie. But it struck me about how many people I do overlook that way.
Well, I think it made her all the more powerful. In that it really spotlighted her, again, her strength. I mean, this is a warrior. She's a warrior.
Yeah.
I just really, that word just came to me. She really is. And, her garments are a reflection, because they were so simple and not very colorful even. If she'd had a colorful top and, like some dark pants or even some jewelry.
Anything.
Yeah, it was very stark.
Yeah. Yeah. Sharon, it looked like you were going to say something.
Oh, I just thought Greg's always kind of had a thing for Selma Hayek. so it's like to see her have the courage as an actress to, portray this character. It's just, I mean, she's obviously a woman of integrity too, that we know. I mean, I know things about her that suggest that. And so that was an impressive choice.
But I think that a lot of there's a lot of impressive choices in this movie, by directors, by actors, by writers.
Oh yeah.
And yet it's the type of movie that easily gets overlooked because it's not going to get the big box office.
I've always tended to be disappointed when someone takes their own life. But watching this movie and her choice at the end, I mean, I was reminded of the stories that we're hearing about young African American people. Suicide is up among them right now, and it's like, of course it is. They're seeing this thing, this oppression and murder of their own people so blatantly, and the powers that be don't care. And Beatriz, the character, not only had her goat murdered by the callous neighbor, but she said, I have this young patient, 16, and I can't help him. He's going to die. And the suffering just became too much for her. It gave me more compassion for the choice she made.
The hard part is that both societally and religiously, we have chosen to condemn suicide because that's simpler for us as individuals and as a society. If that person was just wrong. The real difficulty with suicide are the questions it puts in our own souls. And if we can easily write that off, then I don't have to deal with my questions. It's much more difficult to say, why is it that this person get to that spot? And what do I do to help others not? How do I listen to the next Beatriz? Right? And too often I'm the Doug Strutt that doesn't like to have to look at that side of answers, because they fly in the face of the ones that I've already figured out.
Well, again and again, once again, we go into criticism. We go into, again, these definitions that are very narrow about what's right and wrong, and that gosh awful judging that goes on almost constantly in our society and all around us. And I'm glad that Greg, that you raised that and that we're talking about that, because because I think there is another way to think about suicide, and because there's all the people that get left behind in family and friends that are kind of left to deal with it and pick up the pieces. And so I guess I've never thought about it in quite this way. So maybe sometimes it's possible that suicide can be one of the more selfless things that somebody might choose to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's at least part of the question is was that protecting others from whatever else she could have been? Was that the kindest act? I'm glad you have questions not unanswered. Not answered. Did I say that wrong? I'm glad that you're still struggling with, because this movie should put struggles in your soul.
Really?
Right? And those are appropriate and good struggles for us to have. Next week, our movie is Michael Collins. Oh, can't see it very well, but
Yeah.
anyway, Michael Collins. Liam Neeson playing one of the great heroes of Ireland and trying to give definition to that man and hopefully help us to understand better. So thank you for your time and enjoy watching that next movie. I'll see
Thank
you in a
you.
week.
Thank you all.
Take
Great.
care.
Thanks.
John, go ahead.
We just said thanks.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.